Women don't dream about men like you. They settle for men like you after they fail elsewhere, my girlfriend said during dinner while texting another guy under the table. I smiled politely and quietly walked away forever. Months later, she broke down crying after hearing her own best friend describe me as the biggest mistake she ever made. Women don't dream about men like you. They settle for men like you after they fail elsewhere. I stopped mid-reach for my water glass. The restaurant noise continued around us. Plates scraped. Someone laughed at the table behind me. A server called out an order near the kitchen. Everything kept moving like nothing had just happened. But something had just happened. I looked at her. She wasn't even looking back at me. Her eyes were on her phone, tilted slightly below the table edge, fingers moving. She said it the way someone says pass the salt. No hesitation. No pause before or after. Just a sentence dropped into the air between us like she'd been holding it in her mouth for weeks and finally got tired of the wait. I smiled. Not because it didn't sting, but because something in my chest went very, very quiet. That kind of quiet is dangerous. Not for the person who feels it, for the person who caused it. I didn't know who she was texting yet. Looking back, that moment mattered more than I realized. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that less than a year later, she'd be sitting in her best friend's kitchen, crying in a way I'd never once seen her cry for me, listening to that same best friend say almost the same words back to her. Except this time, they wouldn't be about a man she'd underestimated. They'd be about a man she'd already lost. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29. She was 27. Her name was Vanessa, and we'd been together for 3 years and 4 months. We'd been living together in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn for 11 of those months. She kept plants on the windowsill and burned candles that smelled like cedar. I paid slightly more than half the rent without making it a conversation. We had a routine. Sunday grocery runs. Thursday dinners out. A shared streaming account, and a standing argument about what to watch. It looked like a real relationship from the outside. From the inside, I'd been watching something quietly dissolve for about 4 months before that dinner. Small things. The kind of things that don't read as warnings until you put them all in a line. That dinner should have ended everything immediately. But it didn't. The restaurant was a mid-range Italian place in Park Slope she'd picked. Not our usual spot. I remember thinking she seemed distracted before we even sat down. She checked her phone twice in the Uber. Once while looking out the window, once while I was talking. I noticed. I didn't say anything. We ordered. She had the gnocchi. I had the short rib. The bread came and she ignored it, which was strange because she usually went for the bread first. We were talking, or I was talking, about a project I'd been working on. I'm a structural engineer. I'd been brought onto a commercial renovation project in the Bronx that had some genuinely interesting complications. I wasn't bragging. I was just telling her about my day. She said, twice. Then her phone buzzed under the table and her eyes dropped. That was when she said it. Still looking at the screen. Still typing. Women don't dream about men like you. They settle for men like you after they fail elsewhere. I put my water glass down slowly. What was that? I asked. Not aggressive. Genuinely asking. She looked up. Something flashed across her face. Not guilt. Not immediately. Something more like mild surprise. Like she hadn't realized she'd said it loud enough to hear. I'm just saying, she said, going back to her phone. You're stable. You're reliable. You're not exactly the guy women are obsessed with, you know? You're the guy they appreciate eventually. She said eventually like it was a compliment. I looked at her for a moment. The phone under the table. The casual delivery. The way she was already reading whatever response had just come through. Who are you texting? I asked. My sister, she said. I knew she was lying. Her sister's name is Rena, and Rena texts in long paragraphs, which means Vanessa's responses are always long too. What I watched her type was short. A few words. A reaction to something she'd just read. I smiled. Politely. The way you smile when a waiter asks if everything's all right and everything isn't. But that's not the waiter's problem. I picked up my fork. I ate my dinner. I didn't say another word about it. That wasn't even the worst part. Here's what I should tell you about how we got there, because it didn't happen overnight. Vanessa was smart and funny and social in a way that I'm not. She had a wide circle, co-workers, college friends, girls from her gym. She'd grown up in the Bronx and had that particular brand of confidence that people from that borough tend to carry. She was opinionated. She dressed well. She had ambitions that she talked about more than she acted on, but I respected the ambition regardless. When we met, She made me feel like I was the most interesting man she'd ever had dinner with. She asked questions. She leaned forward when I talked. She called me the next day, which almost no one does anymore. That version of Vanessa I would have done anything for. I'm not sure exactly when she became a different version. Around month 31 or 32, something shifted. I couldn't name it at the time. She became slightly less present. Not in a dramatic way. In a 1 degree off kind of way. She started going out more. Not excessively. Once or twice a week. But more than before, and with less detail about where or who. She'd come home energized in a way that our evenings together hadn't been producing. I noticed. I told myself it was just a social phase. Then around month 33, a name started appearing. Marcus. Not a boyfriend. Not, as far as I could confirm, anything concrete. A guy from her industry. She worked in marketing at a mid-sized media company. They'd been brought together on a brand campaign. She mentioned him first casually, then occasionally. Then she stopped mentioning him entirely, which is its own kind of mention. I didn't make accusations. I asked once, early on, whether they were spending a lot of time together. She said it was work. I let it go, but I kept watching. The phone face-down habit started around month 34. The comparison language started around month 35. The comparison language was subtle at first. Marcus presented to the VP last week. His whole team got recognized. Fine. Work conversation. He drove us to the site visit. He's got one of those new Range Rovers. Fully loaded. Also fine. Expensive taste. Observation. You know, some guys are just magnetic in a room. Like, people move toward them. You ever notice how some people just have that? I looked up from the book I was reading. I've noticed, I said. She was on her phone. I went back to my book. That was the first time I felt embarrassed standing next to her, even though she wasn't in the room. After the dinner in Park Slope, I gave it 3 days. I wasn't punishing her. I was deciding. There's a difference between needing space to process something and withdrawing to manufacture a reaction, and I want to be clear, I wasn't doing the second thing. I was genuinely thinking. I'd put 3 years and 4 months into this relationship. I wasn't going to throw that away over one awful sentence without being certain I understood what the sentence meant. What I concluded by the end of those 3 days was this. The sentence itself wasn't the problem. The phone under the table wasn't the problem. The problem was that Vanessa had gotten to a place where she thought about me in those terms, stable, reliable, eventually appreciated, and had been thinking about me in those terms long enough that it came out of her mouth without effort, mid-text, in public. She'd already emotionally left. She just hadn't done the paperwork yet. I didn't confront her. I didn't bring it back up. I started making changes quietly. I moved 3 months of savings into a separate account I'd opened in college that she didn't know about. I called my cousin Harold, who had a 2-bedroom in Flatbush he'd been renting out since his girlfriend moved in with him. 1 bedroom was open. I didn't commit to it. I just asked him to hold it. I kept going to work. I kept coming home. I kept being present and calm. But something in me was done. I didn't tell her that yet. The next 3 weeks were a study in contrast. Vanessa was lighter. Almost cheerful. She suggested we try a new Thai place on Atlantic Avenue. She laughed at something I said. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. She was affectionate on a Tuesday night, which hadn't happened on a Tuesday in months. That should have made me hopeful. Instead, it made me more certain. People get lighter when they've made a decision. When the internal conflict they've been carrying is finally resolved. She'd said the things she'd been thinking. She'd sent whatever texts she'd been sending. Something had been set in motion for her emotionally. She wasn't fighting with herself about it anymore. She seemed settled. I acted normal. I cooked on Saturdays like I always did. I asked about her day. I watched the shows she wanted to watch. I was already somewhere else. Then one Thursday evening, she came home from a work happy hour smelling like a bar and carrying a different energy than the one she'd left with. Not drunk. Loose. Like someone who'd spent 2 hours being told things she wanted to hear. She sat on the couch next to me and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said. "Do you ever think we want different things?" I looked at the television. In what sense? In the big sense. Life. What we're building. Where we're going. I turned to look at her. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" She pulled at a thread on the couch cushion. "I'm just saying sometimes I feel like maybe we're in different places." "What place are you in?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Not directly." She said, "I just think I want more than this." She gestured vaguely at the apartment when she said this. At the apartment we'd built together. At the plants she'd picked out. At the candles she bought. At the bookshelf we'd assembled wrong and never fixed. This. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "That was it. That was all I gave her. She seemed confused by that, like she'd expected something more. A fight. A plea. A list of reasons why this was worth fighting for. She looked at me for a moment, and I could see her recalibrating, trying to figure out what my calm meant. I turned back to the television. She sat there for another few minutes. Then she got up and went to bed. The name Marcus appeared out loud one final time, about a week after that. We were getting ready in the morning. She for work, me for work, and she mentioned almost offhandedly that her company had a rooftop event the following weekend. Client thing. Mandatory attendance. Marcus is organizing the whole thing, she said, applying mascara in the bathroom mirror. He's actually incredible at events. He just has this energy, you know? People want to be around it. I was tying my shoes on the edge of the bed. I said nothing. She looked at me in the mirror. You're quiet. Early morning, I said. She turned back to her reflection. Kept talking about the event. The venue. The guest list. What she was going to wear. Somewhere in the middle of it, I made my decision with such finality that my hands stopped moving. I finished tying my shoe. I stood up. I said, I'm going to stay at Harold's for a while. She froze. The mascara wand stopped. She turned around. What? I need some space, I said. Calm. No heat in it. I'll take a bag tonight and be out of your way. She stared at me. Vincent. I'm not doing this dramatically, I said. I'm not angry. I just think we've been in different places for a while now, and I'd rather be honest about that than keep pretending. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Her eyes got slightly wet. So that's it, she said. You told me 2 weeks ago you wanted more than this, I said. I heard you. This is me respecting that. She didn't have a response to that either. I packed a bag that evening. Took my laptop, my work files, my good jacket, a week's worth of clothes. I put my key on the kitchen counter. She was sitting on the couch watching me. She didn't cry. Not yet. She looked like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I picked up my bag. Take care of yourself, I said. And I walked out. Harold's apartment was small and cluttered and exactly what I needed. He was a good cousin, not the type to ask 100 questions. He made strong coffee in the morning, left me alone when I needed it, and occasionally knocked on my door to ask if I wanted to watch a game. The first 2 weeks I was there, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't know what that meant until I thought about it clearly. I hadn't been sleeping well for a long time. I just stopped noticing. I called a moving company on a Saturday morning and went back to the apartment when I knew Vanessa was at her gym class. I took what was mine. My books, my drafting tools, a cast iron pan I'd had since before we met, the good coffee grinder. I left everything that was ours and everything that was hers without debate. I left the plants. She loved those plants. By early afternoon I was done. I texted her when I was leaving. I got my things. The rest is yours. I hope the transition is smooth for you. She read it immediately. She didn't respond for 4 hours. When she did, it was, I didn't think you'd actually do it. I looked at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone in my pocket and helped Harold carry my boxes to the second bedroom. The next few months were quieter than I expected. Not empty. Quiet in the way that a room gets when you remove the source of tension from it. Lighter, somehow, easier to breathe in. I threw myself into work. The Bronx renovation project had gotten more complex, and I was being relied on heavily, which I appreciated. There's something grounding about problems that have definite solutions, where the laws of physics don't shift based on someone's mood. I stayed late when I needed to. I came in early when it helped. My manager, a straight-talking woman named Beverly, pulled me aside about 2 months after I'd moved to Harold's and told me she was recommending me for a senior project lead position on an upcoming high-rise development in Lower Manhattan. It was the kind of project that put names on buildings, figuratively. You've been sharp lately, she said. Whatever you've got going on, keep doing it. I thanked her and went back to my desk. I started running again. I'd let it lapse during the last year with Vanessa. Too tired, too comfortable, always something else. I started at 3 miles and worked up to 6 within 2 months. Not to look different, just because I needed somewhere to put the energy. I didn't get back on dating apps immediately. I wasn't in a rush. The last thing I wanted to do was start something new while I was still unpacking the last thing I'd ended. My friend Dean, who I've known since undergrad, took me to a cookout at his girlfriend's place in Bed-Stuy about 3 months after the move. I almost didn't go. I went. Her name was Natalie. Not the girlfriend, a friend of the girlfriend. She worked in urban planning. She had strong opinions about subway infrastructure and a quiet, particular way of paying attention when you talk that I recognized immediately as rare. She asked what I worked on. I told her. She didn't say twice and go back to her phone. We talked for 2 hours. I got her number. I didn't text her for 4 days, not strategically, just because I was genuinely busy and I wanted to be in a good headspace when I did. She texted first on day 3. Something in my chest unclenched. Vanessa texted me twice during those months. The first time was about 6 weeks after the move. A long message. I could tell she drafted it. She said she'd been thinking about what happened, that she knew she hadn't been fully present, that she wanted to understand what went wrong. I read it once. I responded, I think we both know what went wrong. I don't have anything to add to it. I genuinely wish you well. She tried to call twice that night. I let it go to voicemail. The second text came about 2 months later. 3 words, are you okay? I thought about that question for a moment. About who was really asking it, and what they actually wanted to know. I wrote back, I'm good. Hope you are too. That was the last communication we had. I didn't find out what happened at her end until I didn't. I heard it from Dean, which is how I hear most things I'm not actively trying to know. Dean was at a birthday dinner for his girlfriend Lorraine about 8 months after I'd left the apartment. Vanessa was there. They'd stayed loosely connected through Lorraine's circle. So was Christy, Vanessa's closest friend, who I'd met a handful of times over the years. Dean texted me the next day. Yo, you okay? Something happened at dinner last night you should know about. I called him on my lunch break. He told me that the dinner had started normally. Then somewhere around the 3rd round of drinks, Lorraine mentioned that she'd run into me and Natalie at a gallery opening in Dumbo 2 weekends before. She'd been warm about it, said I looked genuinely happy, that Natalie seemed wonderful, that she was glad I was doing well. According to Dean, something changed in Vanessa's face at that point. She got quiet. Then she tried to seem unbothered. Then she excused herself to the bathroom for a few minutes. When she came back, she was more quiet than before. Christy apparently noticed. Later in the evening, once the group had split into side conversations, Christy and Vanessa were on their own for a bit. Dean couldn't hear everything from where he was sitting, but he caught pieces. He heard Vanessa say something about how she didn't realize things had moved that fast. And he heard Christy say, and this is what he led with when he called me. Vanessa, you told him women only settle for men like him. And you said it to his face at dinner. You knew what you were doing. That man walked out with his dignity and rebuilt from scratch. Losing him is the biggest mistake you ever made. The table had gone mostly quiet by then. Dean said Vanessa didn't respond for a long moment. Then she started crying. Not quietly. Not the kind of crying you do to get sympathy. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper that you can't quite control once it starts. Lorraine reached over and touched her arm. Christy didn't take it back. I sat with that for a while after Dean told me. Not with satisfaction, exactly. Not with the kind of relief I thought I'd feel if I ever heard something like that. With something quieter and more complicated. There's a version of yourself that, when you're in the middle of being disrespected, fantasizes about moments like that. Fantasizes about the person who underestimated you sitting somewhere in the ruins of that decision while someone else names their mistake out loud for them. You tell yourself you don't want that. You tell yourself you've moved on. But there's a small part of you that keeps a ledger. What I actually felt when Dean told me wasn't triumph. It was something closer to exhaustion. Not for me. For her. For the specific kind of pain that comes from realizing, too late, that you'd misread something important. I knew what that felt like. I'd had my own version of it in other contexts. It isn't pleasurable. It doesn't correct anything. It just sits there. I told Dean thank you for telling me. I went back to work. That night, Natalie made dinner at her place. She'd been making dinner on Thursdays for a few months by then. And I sat in her kitchen and watched her move around the stove and felt something I can only describe as earned. Not perfect. Not without complications. But chosen. Clearly, quietly, deliberately chosen. That meant something to me that I hadn't known I needed. I ran into Vanessa once. About 11 months after I'd left the apartment. Totally unplanned. I was coming out of a hardware store on Flatbush, and she was walking toward it with a bag over her shoulder and her hair shorter than I remembered. We both stopped. She looked at me. I looked at her. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Not bad. She still looked like herself, just slightly worn around the edges, like something had been working on her from the inside. Hey, she said. Hey, I said. A beat. You look good, she said. Her voice was measured. Careful. Thanks, I said. You too. She glanced down for a moment. Then back up. How are you doing? Really well, I said. And I meant it without any performance in it. You? She gave a small, tight smile. Working through some things. I nodded. She opened her mouth like there was more. Like she'd rehearsed something, or thought about this moment, or had been waiting for a version of it. I waited. What she said was, I said something to you once that was, she paused. I was really unfair to you. I want you to know I know that. I looked at her for a moment. I appreciate that, I said. Is that all you're going to say? She asked, almost quietly. Yeah, I said. I think so. She nodded slowly. Her eyes got that particular quality that comes right before someone tries not to cry in public. I didn't need to watch that. I shifted the bag in my hand. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. I walked past her. She didn't call after me. I didn't look back. There are things I've turned over since then, about that relationship, about who I was in it, about what I missed and what I didn't. I've never been interested in the version of this story where I'm blameless and she's monstrous, because that's not what happened. Relationships don't dissolve on one side. There were months where I was too absorbed in work, too comfortable, too willing to let distance widen without naming it. There was a version of that conversation I could have had with her earlier. Maybe it would have changed something. Probably not. But I haven't pretended those months didn't exist. What I know is this. The night she said what she said at that restaurant, something in me recognized that the relationship was already over, that she'd moved past it emotionally and was just physically still in it. What I did with that recognition was walk away without destroying anything, without cruelty, without a performance, without the screaming and begging and bargaining that wouldn't have changed anything and would have cost me something I didn't want to spend. I stayed calm, not because I wasn't hurt, because I understood that how you leave something matters, not to the other person necessarily, to yourself. The promotion came through. The Natalie situation became a real relationship without me engineering it. Harold got his second bedroom back and eventually made me dinner as a thank you when I found my own place near Prospect Park. Beverly called me into her office one afternoon and slid a contract across her desk with a number on it that made me sit up straighter. None of that happened to make a point. None of it was about Vanessa. It was just the result of pointing yourself in a direction and walking. Christy was right, I think. Not for my benefit. For Vanessa's. Because that's what real friends do. They name the mistake even when it's uncomfortable, even when the wine is still on the table, even when it makes someone cry. Vanessa lost something real. I hope she builds something real too. But I'm not part of that story anymore. Natalie and I went to dinner on a Wednesday. Not our usual Thursday, just a random Wednesday, because she'd had a rough day and I suggested getting out of the house. We sat across from each other at a small place in Carroll Gardens, the kind of spot with mismatched chairs and good pasta and no particular ambition to impress anyone. She was still in her work clothes. I was in mine. She talked about her day without editing it. I talked about the high-rise project and the complication we'd hit with a load-bearing revision, and she leaned forward with her chin in her hand and asked a question that showed she'd been listening from the beginning. Not twice. A question. I answered it. She ordered the bread when it came without deliberating. I watched her for a moment across that small table. The candle between us. The noise of the restaurant around us. The completely ordinary Tuesday-level happiness of a dinner that didn't require anything from either of us except presence. I thought about a different restaurant, a different table, a phone under the edge of a tablecloth, and a sentence delivered to the air between two people who had already stopped seeing each other clearly. I thought, this is what the difference feels like. I reached over and poured more wine into her glass. She looked up and smiled. That was enough. That has always been enough. Some people only understand the value of something once they've permanently lost access to it. She understood. I was already gone.